What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So I know after we took a little bit of a break a while back, we definitely did put a lot of time into trying to increase our production quality of the videos the best we could, and definitely a lot of that meant exploring new directions for our content in general. But that being said, Scrapped Abilities has always been one of my absolute favorite series to make alongside the What Could Have Been episodes, since it gives us a really awesome chance to explore the champion design process, as well as picking up some hints about what abilities might turn up in the game's future. And it's always just really cool and interesting for me to make because, well, it's kind of just a unique piece of content that most other YouTubers don't really cover, and that's something that I think really appeals to me as a creator. So hopefully you guys agree and enjoy those series as well, and ideally by combining them with our new production standards, we're hopefully going to be able to continue to explore those topics further, and we're definitely going to make sure to only cover abilities that we've never covered in any previous video before. So although maybe it feels a little bit repetitive to some of you guys out there, the content itself is actually still fresh and different. So without further ado, let's jump right into today's list of canceled abilities that never made it into League of Legends. Now, the first group of scrapped abilities on our list today are a couple of really neat little concepts that were originally tested for Malphite's tank rework. In the lore, Malphite is quite literally a mountain, so Riot had decided to try to attempt to push that design further and bring some abilities to the table that would more accurately reflect that concept as a champion. And one of the cooler ideas that was cancelled here was to give him an ability that actually turned Malphite into a straight up wall.
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me.
He is, after all, a mountain, so this ability would give him that feeling of being impassable terrain. Walls have shown to be somewhat successful so far in the game when you look at Anivia, Talia, Jarvan, and Trundle as well, so these terrain-based abilities, adding that to a mountain champion would have potentially been a pretty interesting design. Generally speaking, wall abilities are made to zone out or separate enemy teams, but putting a wall ability on an initiator like Malphite could have opened up some really crazy team play with champions like maybe Vayne and Poppy, who could take advantage of the terrain to make some really cool plays. Or on one hand, you also have the alternative of maybe you ult into an enemy team, and then you turn into a wall and just block all of them out from escaping. Definitely would have been really cool to play with for sure. Another scrapped ability for the cancelled Malphite rework was the idea of giving him some kind of echoing earthquake, maybe like one big earthquake followed up by smaller aftershocks. As a tank, his focus is on distraction and dealing area of effect damage, so earthquakes could have been a really cool way to tie that ability into his lore, but despite the promise that those two abilities showed, it kind of just didn't work out as expected, and eventually his rework entirely was cancelled. That being said though, Riot have mentioned that they might try to figure it out in the future, and he definitely still could get a rework, so don't count these ones out forever just yet. Now our next ability comes from early on in reksai's development, and the idea was to give reksai some form of stealth. It was actually quite similar to the way Evelyn's stealth is designed. The burrowed form was pretty much already locked in as one of the key aspects of her design, so adding in a stealth feature to the burrowed form would have been a pretty cool way to add some contrast between reksai being burrowed versus being unburrowed. Unfortunately, it became clear quite quickly that tanky and relatively high damage initiators are quite strong enough without having stealth added into the mix, so Riot had to seek out some different solutions when it came to making burrowing feel cohesive. Tremor Sense ended up being a pretty elegant fix that gave an interesting gameplay element to being burrowed, while also keeping things a little bit more balanced for those on the receiving end of reksai's initiations. So it's pretty clear that Riot made the right choice when it came to removing her stealth. Third on our list today, we have Cled, with an ability that is actually unlike anything we've ever covered before in a video, because it was actually never intended to be on his final kit, despite the fact that he playtested with it. Around the time that the first iteration of Cled's gameplay had been completed, it was clear that he wasn't going to have a conventional ultimate. That being said though, champions undergoing testing still need to be able to play and hold their own from level 1 right up to level 18, so it wasn't really possible to test Cled's basic abilities without giving him an ultimate to help out, and they weren't really able to try and figure out what the ultimate was going to be without playtesting his basic abilities. Alternatively, they could have just juiced up the numbers on his Q, W, and E and playtested him without an ultimate, but having those abilities being obviously overpowered kind of ruins the whole playtesting process. And without an ultimate, he would only really function in the game until level 6 when he would just fall off a cliff in terms of power level because everyone else would have their ultimates to use. As a result, Riot actually playtested him. They gave him an exact copy-paste version of Riven's ultimate, Blade of the Exile and Windslash, which gave Cled a fighting chance in a game while Riot tested out the rest of his kit. By the end of his development, it's clear that Riot had decided that he was going to need some kind of ultimate regardless, but it's only usable while he's mounted, so he still ended up a little more limited in the ultimate department when compared to most other champions. Now our next ability comes from Katarina's rework, and although we're usually sad to see really cool scrapped abilities not make it into the game, this is one that we can all be glad that we never had to play against. The idea was to give Katarina a free targeted shunpo, so you could just point and click and jump to the spot, with a 1-second delay, so it would function similarly to the initial cast of Elise's Repel. The catch was that it would basically just kill anyone in the target area once she actually arrived, and it did a lot of damage. That's already pretty obnoxious as an ability, but keep in mind at the time, they were redesigning shunpo with the reset mechanic in mind, which basically meant that if you were ever unfortunate enough to be caught near her shunpo, not only would you lose your life, but you'd allow her to keep chaining them together and just wreck your entire team. It's not strange for assassins to have movement abilities that have the potential to deal some really good damage, because it's a good trade-off of risk versus reward in terms of ability design, but making it so she's temporarily untargetable and can reset the cooldown is just so insane and would have had serious balance issues in the game for sure. And since we're on the topic of covering some super frustrating abilities, here's one from LeBlanc's rework that definitely drove the playtesters insane. While redesigning LeBlanc's ultimate during her rework, they tested out a Wukong clone mechanic, where enemies wouldn't be able to tell whether or not she ulted. Instead, after activating the ultimate, LeBlanc would be replaced by a clone at the beginning of the spell cast, and LeBlanc would get stealthed for a short period of time. Any single target damage would pop the clone, and of course reveal the true LeBlanc, but that essentially meant that people would react to LeBlanc's ultimate only to discover that it was the clone, and LeBlanc was still alive and ready to blow them up. And one writer commented that at one point during a playtest, they all heard Riot Groovy Lord yell across the building, "I don't know what's real anymore." I guess that's one way to know when an ability is just not going to work out. Now our next abilities for today both come from actually Taric's rework, and they're scrapped ideas for his ultimate. Riot Repertoire was responding to a question asking whether Cosmic Radiance was the first ultimate idea that they came up with for his new kit, and whether they had other concepts in mind before settling on it, and Repertoire responded with a bunch of different ideas that they tested that all sounded equally badass actually. The first one that they playtested was similar to his old targeted stun, his pre-rework stun, only it had an extremely long range to push it up to the power level of an ultimate, and I think it had an increased duration too. Now I can't say for sure how powerful that version of the ultimate would be, but it definitely actually does kind of sound a little uninspired and not necessarily all that exciting to play with for sure. Next up was something that probably would have been incredibly frustrating though, and it was a channeled resurrection. We don't know whether it was single or multi-targeted, but the idea of letting Taric do a channel and then bringing one or more of his allied champions back to life sounds actually quite powerful, although maybe it was a little bit too close to Zilean's ultimate, or perhaps that version essentially just becomes a really broken Zilean ultimate, and overall probably was not the best fit. Now the next ultimate concept they tested for Taric's rework was sort of this offensive/defensive form swap, essentially meaning that the new support Taric would be able to focus on playing as kind of this tanky enchanter type, or more of a frontline initiator I guess, which is actually pretty cool for a champion like Taric who fits both of those roles potentially, but it was probably rejected for being a little bit unfun compared to some of his more dazzling ultimate concepts. And the last idea Riot Repertoire mentioned that they tested for his ultimate was a twist on Ahri's charm, but instead of being a single targeted skill shot, it would be essentially a player-based area of effect version of her charm. So essentially once Taric triggered his ultimate, everyone in an area around him would be captivated by his fabulous aura that they would be taunted towards him in a way similar to Galio's old ultimate but without the channel. Unfortunately, Riot spent most of their fabulous power budget for Taric on his hair, so there was nothing left to fit this idea for his ultimate in his kit. But overall, that's just about going to wrap it up for our list of abilities that got canceled from League of Legends for today. I had a lot of fun researching these, and I hope you guys had a lot of fun enjoying our new and increased production value for this sort of video concept. Definitely hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.